In the annals of true crime, few cases have captured the public imagination quite like the murder of Ted Ammon. This tale of wealth, betrayal, and fatal attraction unfolded against the backdrop of New York's elite social circles, culminating in a brutal killing that would shock the nation. The story of Ted Ammon's demise is not just a sensational headline, but a complex narrative that delves into the dark underbelly of privilege and the destructive power of greed. At its core, the Ammon case is a cautionary tale of how quickly the American dream can turn into a nightmare. It's a story that begins with ambition and success, only to unravel into a web of deceit, infidelity, and ultimately murder. As we explore the events leading up to that fateful night in October 2001 and its aftermath, we'll uncover a saga that reads like a Hollywood thriller, but carries very real and tragic consequences for all involved. Theodore Ted Ammon was born in 1949 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. He grew up in a middle-class family in East Aurora, New York, where he excelled academically and athletically. Driven and ambitious from a young age, Ammon went on to attend Bucknell University before launching a successful career in finance. In 1986, Ted Ammon married Jenna Rand, a real estate agent he met in New York City. The couple seemed to have it all: wealth, status, and a glamorous lifestyle. Unable to have children of their own, they adopted twins Greg and Alexa from Ukraine in 1992. Ammon's career in finance was meteoric. He worked his way up at prestigious firms like Kohlberg Kravis Roberts & Co., and became a partner at private equity firm Chancery Lane Capital. By the late 1990s, Ammon had amassed a fortune estimated at over $80 million. The family split their time between a lavish townhouse in Manhattan and a sprawling estate in East Hampton. Despite outward appearances, cracks were forming in the Ammons' marriage by the late 1990s. Ted was often away on business, while Jenna felt increasingly isolated. She suspected Ted was having an affair. In 2000, Jenna discovered Ted had consulted a divorce attorney and the couple separated acrimoniously. A bitter divorce battle ensued, with the couple fighting over their substantial assets and custody of their children. By October 2001, they were on the verge of finalizing a $25 million divorce settlement. However, events would take a shocking turn before the papers could be signed. In 2000, while separated from Ted, Jenna began an affair with Daniel Pelosi, an electrician working on renovations at her Manhattan townhouse. Pelosi came from a blue-collar background on Long Island, in stark contrast to the wealthy circles Jenna was accustomed to. Despite their differences, Jenna was drawn to Pelosi's rugged charm. For his part, Pelosi saw Jenna as his ticket to a life of luxury. The couple moved in together, much to Ted Ammon's dismay. Pelosi ingratiated himself with the Ammon children, often driving them to school and activities. On October 20, 2001, Ted Ammon arrived alone at his East Hampton mansion for the weekend. It would be the last time he was seen alive. 2 days later, on October 22nd, Ted's business partner became concerned when Ammon missed important meetings. He dispatched Ammon's driver to check on him at the East Hampton house. At 5:19 p.m. on October 22nd, a chilling 911 call was placed from the Ammon residence. The caller, later identified as Ammon's driver, reported finding his employer's lifeless body in the master bedroom. The driver's voice was panicked as he described the gruesome scene to the dispatcher. Police arrived to find a horrific tableau. Ted Ammon lay naked on his bed, his skull crushed by repeated blows from a blunt object. There were at least 30 separate wounds to Ammon's head and torso. Bizarrely, despite signs of a violent struggle, there was little blood at the scene. Investigators would later determine the killer had meticulously cleaned up after the murder. Even more perplexing, there were no signs of forced entry. The house's sophisticated security system, recently installed by none other than Danny Pelosi, had not been triggered. Ammon's 3 dogs were found unharmed in the house, suggesting they knew the killer. From the start, suspicion fell on Generosa Ammon and her boyfriend Danny Pelosi. They had clear motives. Generosa stood to inherit Ted's fortune if he died before their divorce was finalized, while Pelosi saw an opportunity to secure his own financial future. However, both Generosa and Pelosi had alibis for the night of the murder. They claimed to have been at Generosa's Center Morich's home, over an hour's drive from East Hampton. With no physical evidence tying them to the scene, the case quickly went cold. As weeks turned to months, investigators slowly built a circumstantial case against Danny Pelosi. Pelosi had installed the security system at Ammon's home and knew how to bypass it. Cell phone records placed Pelosi's phone near East Hampton on the night of the murder. Witnesses reported seeing Pelosi's van in the area that weekend. Pelosi was heard bragging about the murder to associates. He displayed sudden wealth after Ammon's death, buying expensive cars and jewelry. Perhaps most damning was testimony from Christopher Porrino, a friend of Pelosi's, who claimed he drove Pelosi to Ammon's house the night of the murder. Porrino said Pelosi emerged hours later with blood on his clothes, saying, "I think he's dead." Pelosi maintained his innocence, insisting he was with Generosa the entire weekend of the murder. However, his story began to unravel under scrutiny. Cell phone records contradicted his timeline, and witnesses came forward placing him near the crime scene. Pelosi also made incriminating statements to police, at one point saying, "What if I told you I was there that night?" Before quickly backtracking. His erratic behavior and sudden displays of wealth only increased suspicion. In a tragic twist, Generosa Ammon was diagnosed with breast cancer in 2002. She married Pelosi in January 2002, just months after Ted's murder. However, their relationship soon soured as Pelosi's involvement in the murder became clearer. Generosa died in August 2003, leaving behind a complex will that largely disinherited Pelosi. In her final days, she reportedly expressed remorse over her role in the events leading to Ted's death. However, she maintained she had not been directly involved in the murder. Danny Pelosi was finally arrested and charged with Ted Ammon's murder in March 2004. His trial began that October and lasted 13 weeks. Prosecutors painted Pelosi as a gold digger who saw Ted Ammon as the only obstacle to a life of wealth and luxury. The prosecution's case was largely circumstantial, relying heavily on witness testimony about Pelosi's incriminating statements and behavior. They also presented evidence that Pelosi had purchased a stun gun shortly before the murder, a key detail, as investigators believed Ammon had been incapacitated with a stun gun before being beaten to death. Pelosi's defense team attempted to cast doubt on the timeline of events and suggested other potential suspects, including members of Ammon's business circle. They also tried to discredit key witnesses as unreliable felons looking for leniency in their own cases. On December 13, 2004, after deliberating for 4 days, the jury found Danny Pelosi guilty of second-degree murder. He was sentenced to 25 years to life in prison. Pelosi showed little emotion as the verdict was read, maintaining his innocence to the end. In the years since his conviction, Pelosi has made conflicting statements about his role in Ammon's murder. In some interviews, he has continued to proclaim his innocence. In others, he has implicated Generosa as the mastermind behind the killing. In a 2012 Jailhouse interview, Pelosi claimed Generosa had orchestrated the murder out of revenge after learning Ted had fathered a child with another woman. He alleged that Generosa hired his employee Christopher Perino to carry out the killing, with Pelosi only involved in the cover-up. However, these claims have been met with skepticism by investigators and prosecutors, who view them as desperate attempts by Pelosi to shift blame and potentially secure a new trial. Perhaps the greatest tragedy in this sordid tale is the impact on Ted and Generosa's adopted children, Greg and Alexa. Orphaned at a young age, they were caught in the middle of their parents' bitter divorce and its violent aftermath. After Generosa's death, the twins were raised by Ted's sister, Sandy Williams. In 2012, Greg Ammon produced a documentary called 59 Middle Lane, exploring his and Alexa's journey to understand their family's tragic history. Today, Greg and Alexa are in their early 30s and have worked to move beyond the shadow of their parents' tumultuous relationship and violent end. They have spoken about the importance of forgiveness and finding closure. Despite Pelosi's conviction, some questions about Ted Ammon's murder remain unanswered. Was Generosa Ammon involved in planning the murder? Were others present at the crime scene that night? What happened to the murder weapon, which was never found? How did the killer manage to clean up the crime scene so thoroughly? These lingering mysteries continue to fascinate true crime enthusiasts and have spawned numerous books, documentaries, and TV specials in the years since the murder. The murder of Ted Ammon sent shockwaves through New York's elite social circles and captivated the public's attention. It exposed the dark underbelly of wealth and privilege, showing how greed and jealousy can lead to tragic consequences. The case also highlighted issues of domestic violence and the potential dangers of acrimonious divorces. Some advocates have pointed to the Ammon case as an example of why better protections are needed for spouses in high-conflict separations. The murder of Ted Ammon remains one of the most notorious crimes in Hampton's history. It had all the elements of a sensational thriller: wealth, sex, betrayal, and murder. Yet behind the lurid headlines was a very real tragedy that destroyed a family and left two children orphaned. While Danny Pelosi continues to serve his sentence, the reverberations of that fateful night in October 2001 continue to be felt. The Ammon case serves as a cautionary tale about the dark side of wealth and ambition, and the devastating consequences when love turns to hatred. As Greg and Alexa Ammon have shown, there is hope for healing and redemption even in the aftermath of such a horrific crime. Their resilience in the face of unimaginable loss is perhaps the most inspiring aspect of this otherwise tragic story.